My name is Joe Peroni, and this is the Rise Above Project. And today I want to talk about emotional connection. I want to talk about how important it is. I want to talk about how it affects every area of our life. If you want a definition of emotional connection, there isn't one exactly, but we all can feel it and we know what it is when we experience it. You could say that we are in attunement with another person. If you want to get a little bit more technical, you could say that we have limbic resonance with another person, where even our heart rates can be in sync, our breathing can be in sync. We can look at another person and feel totally comfortable with who we are. We know we can say whatever we need to say and it'll be accepted. And we can do that for the other person. And so we feel important. We feel like we're a somebody, and we can do that for somebody else as well. There is almost no friction when there's a limbic resonance or an attunement with somebody, because you're not trying to judge them. You're not trying to change them in any way. Now, there's different levels of emotional connection. There's a big difference between emotional connection between, let's say, romantic partners, or if you're in business. I'll give you an example just today. Today I had some blood work done. I walk into the office, the lady had her back turned to me and she was looking at the computer. She only said one word. She said, "Name." So I gave her my name. Then she said, "Insurance?" Then I said, "Yes, I have insurance." And it kind of went like that. And she finally turned around. Now, I'm not saying I need an emotional connection with someone who's going to be taking my blood, but I do probably expect, or I would feel a little bit better if somebody's going to be doing a procedure on me that had a little bit better of a bedside manner, that seemed like, they thought that I was a human being instead of just another person on their computer or their chart. And I think over my years in business, I could say that that's probably the number one thing that other clients want. Now, I started off as a personal trainer, and I'm still a personal trainer. And what I noticed is that all my years of doing bodybuilding and getting my college degree, it meant something. But I don't think in all the years I've been doing personal training that anybody has ever come up to me and asked to see my degree. Nobody cares. They just want to know that I care about them. They want to know that I can help them. They want to know that I will be there for them. And I had to learn that the hard way, because my first few months as a personal trainer, I thought, I can't make it. Because I was thinking about sets and reps and grams and calories and this. And they were talking about the hardships they had in their life, that they were still trying to get their workouts in to decrease their stress. But they had somebody at home that was difficult. Maybe they had kids that were in trouble. Maybe they were in a relationship that they felt distant, or they were going through a divorce. And they really needed to talk about these things. They needed to get it out. And I was very young, and I was just like, well, next set. And I learned pretty quick that you're not going to have a clientele if you can't emotionally connect. In terms of business, emotional connection increases repeat business. It increases loyalty. It increases the chances that people will refer to you, their friends, family. They'll be willing to pay more. They'll be willing to be inconvenienced if you have to move somewhere. They will drive out of their way for you. I looked at this one survey, and it included 19,000 customers, and 43% said that they believe that emotional attachment was the biggest driver of value. Only 20% said that the product was the biggest value. So again, emotional connection, extremely important. When we're looking at things like church, sports, music, any type of job, emotional connection and a sense of community is extremely important. I just had a party over the weekend, and one of the things we talked about is listening to these classic rock bands, and if you would go to a concert, if they replaced some of the musicians there. And let's say, for example, someone was a singer and they just couldn't sing that well anymore because they're in their late 70s. What if you replaced that singer with someone who was in their 30s and sounded much better? You would think that somebody would prefer to listen to that. But that's not true. Because if you grew up with the band and you've been listening to them since you were a teenager, you don't want to see those people replaced, even if they sound better. And the reason for that is because you have an emotional connection with them. And just replacing them takes away that connection, and it doesn't matter what they sound like at that point. And I think everybody at that party all agreed on that that's something that's important, is emotional connection. Now let's take it from an existential point of view. Why is emotional connection important from that view? And it would be, there's a lot of reasons, I'll give you one. Because there's 8 billion people on the planet. And as human beings, mortal creatures, we don't have a long life. We're here for just a short amount of time, and then we're gone. So what gives us meaning and purpose? What's the meaning of life? Well, these are huge questions that humans have been asking since the beginning of time. And there is no answer for it. Each individual has their own answer. But one thing for sure is that at some point in our lives, we thought that we could do anything in this world. We were going to be famous. We were going to change the whole world. We were going to have kids that were going to be the most amazing kids that ever walked the face of the planet. And yeah, probably everybody's kids are the best kids ever, right? According to the parents. And that's fine. But really, 99.9% of people are just people. Unfortunately, we're very average. And so what makes us stand out? What makes us special? Honestly, probably nothing. Except when we're in a relationship and somebody sees us and they're a witness to our life and we're a witness to theirs. Growing old when you're doing it with somebody else doesn't make you feel as old because you're doing it together. And that takes away some of the harshness of life. Again, emotional connection. When somebody loses somebody, especially in a romantic relationship, you grieve them. We grieve all losses. But when you're in a romantic relationship, what you grieve also is your past and your memories. Because that person was a witness to your life. And now that they're gone, you can't experience that with them anymore. And therefore, you lose part of yourself. So every time we lose somebody in our life, we lose parts of ourselves. And it's very hard to reminisce about that because other people don't necessarily want to hear about what you did in your prior life. Plus, they weren't there for it. So it's not that meaningful to them. So we grieve that. And then we also grieve the future because there was supposed to be a future. So from an existential point of view, emotional connection is important because as we grow old, it's not as harsh when we do it with other people. And we also have a witness to our lives. And then there's a chance, well, for sure we end up losing that. And then we grieve all of that as well. Now, in terms of emotional connection, I've been doing a lot of thinking this week about this. I wanted to do this show not so much in a technical fashion because I think the show is a lot more, I think it's a lot deeper than that. And so I was thinking of the many times I've gone out to restaurants before and I would watch a couple. And it's amazing to me because at some point, and I don't know if they're married or not, let's just say that they are, that relationship is going to end one way or another. Either they're going to split up, they're going to get divorced, or if they don't get divorced, one of them's going to die. And you think that they would have more respect for each other and for the time that they're spending together, because it's not going to be there forever. What I watch is people on their phones. One or both partners are sitting with their heads down and they're texting or scrolling, doing whatever, not paying attention to their partner. Pretty much zero emotional connection. Then they'll look up at the TV every once in a while and they'll go, "Ooh, look, the Vegas Knights, they just scored a goal." And the other one says, "Great, they scored a goal. I like them. I root for them. They're the home team." Or whatever game that they're watching, some basketball game, some football game. And they're talking about things. They're not talking about anything to do with each other. Then they talk about some of the people that are in the room. "Oh, look at that person. Look at that. The clothes that that person is wearing, is that appropriate for this restaurant? Oh, I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it's not." Again, has nothing to do with talking to each other. Then the food comes. "Wow, my food's hot. Is yours hot? Oh, well, the service is pretty good. It seemed to be pretty quick. How about your service? My service was good. Oh, I noticed that you have some extra bread. Are you going to eat the bread? I would like bread. Would you like butter on the bread? Nope." Again, the conversations, the way people treat other people is very interesting to me, because I'm of the belief that if you talk in such a superficial way, and I'm not saying that there's not a time and place for that, because not every conversation needs to be an in-depth conversation, that plumbs your soul. But what I'm saying is that what I see over and over again, and what I hear from people, is this such low level vibration of communication that I really believe that if every person in that restaurant switched places and started to have dinner with somebody else, I don't know if anybody would notice any difference. Every single person there could switch partners and they could still look up at the TV and go, the Vegas Knights scored a goal. Is your dinner warm? So I'm not seeing a lot of communication here. Which also made me think about when I was a kid, when kids used to have a lot of free time and they were bored. They weren't sitting on video games all day. They would actually talk to each other. And we would play games like Truth or Dare. And what it would be is you would have a friend or a bunch of friends, and somebody would ask you a question and you had to tell the truth. Now, the interesting thing here is that, of course, you would trust that the other person would also answer truthfully on a question, so it would go back and forth. And this little kids game is actually a great game, because you're teaching yourself and you're teaching others that you can trust somebody. You can talk to them about relatively deep things. Now, I don't remember everything we talked about when we were 9, 10, 12 years old, but sometimes it would get past the "what's your favorite color" kind of question. And what you start to learn is that you can have some very deep friendships with children, kids, teenagers. And some of these relationships can last a lifetime. Now, the dare part of it would be, "I bet you can't do this," and somebody would do it. And somebody could say, "Well, that could be very dangerous." Well, the way I look at it is, I look at that as sports. When you play sports, you all have the same goal. You're all trying to win and you're doing your best. And most of the time, you're going to be under a lot of adversity. You're going to be sweating, you're going to be tired. I played football, so you're going to get hit. There's people getting bruised, but these are your friends. And I think over time, and I think pretty much everybody I've ever talked to agrees on this too, I don't remember the scores of the games. I don't remember any of that. I don't even remember the record of if we were that great or not. I don't remember how many games we lost every year. I don't remember that. I don't remember how many games we won every year. But I do remember the camaraderie and the friendship and sitting in the locker room being scared to death before the game and having that pregame speech that everybody just felt like we were jumping out of our chests, and then we were walking out onto the field with people cheering and expecting good stuff from us. That's all emotional connection. That's what sports are. There are people that can barely walk 10 steps without being out of breath. They've never been in a gym before. They've never played a sport before. But They will buy all of the paraphernalia for every single sports team. And when that team wins, they say, we won. You didn't win anything. They did. You didn't get paid a penny. They got paid a lot. But it's the emotional connection to the team and to the community that's important. So what does real emotional connection look like? There's a whole bunch here. I could probably go on for days, but let's just pick a few. Number one, unconditional positive regard, meaning that you can listen to somebody and take away all of this point of view that you might have, listen to their words, and don't run it through your own filter. You're not trying to fact check everybody, and you're not trying to look at them to see why they're so weird and so different from you. We want to listen to them with no judgment. We're not trying to evaluate them. We want to accept people for who they are. And we don't want to look at a person and say, well, I'll approve of you and I'll accept you when you do A, B, or C. Or I'll accept you or approve of you when you become something that I want, A, B, or C. Now, I see this a lot in people that have had a fair amount of adversity in their life, and sometimes we can even cross over adversity to trauma. And someone will listen to somebody and they start judging them. One of the things they'll say is, well, this person should be more successful. I don't want them to complain. That bothers me. I don't know why they're like that. Listen, if I can do it, they can do it. So they just don't work hard enough. And one of the things I was thinking here is that, first of all, that's not true. We want to go by somebody's subjective experience, their subjective experience. Just because somebody can do it doesn't mean that everybody can do it. Yes, we all should be treated equal, but we're not equal in a lot of ways. Some of us are taller, some of us are shorter, some of us are more attractive than others, some of us have a higher IQ. So the thought that some people have, that when they say, well, I shouldn't have a lot of empathy for that person, you know, I made it in the world, why shouldn't they? They just need to work harder. Yeah, we can all agree that maybe working harder increases your chances and increases your potential to do better, for sure. But there are a lot of people in the world that no matter how hard they work, they're not going to attain the level of some other people. They don't have that natural talent. They don't have a certain IQ. They don't have the ability to do certain things that other people do. So therefore, when we think in terms of really trying to feel and to understand somebody else's subjective experience, we can take a look at them and say, yeah, you know, it's probably true. Like if a person is depressed because they can't find the love of their life, they can't find the man of their dreams, the woman of their dreams, and they're wondering why, and they get depressed because it hasn't worked out for them. And you look at them and go, well, you know, you should have tried harder. But if you look at them and you really start to understand where they're coming from, there's a pretty good possibility of why they're in that place. And to judge them harshly is probably wrong. I'm recalling a story that I read a long time ago about Dee Snider, who's from Baldwin, Long Island, just like I am. And he was the lead singer for Twisted Sister, became very, very, very popular. And there was a time when he had, well, he always had super long hair, but he had long hair and he was at the beach with his father, and his father was angry at him. It was like, well, you know, you look terrible that way, you need to cut your hair off. And he made Dee Snider, his son, cut his hair off. And they were at the beach, and Dee Snider, I think, was crying or was very angry at his father. And the father, in that moment, said, why are you so angry at me? He said, you made me cut off my hair. It's the only thing I have going for me. And the father in that moment looked at him And this always bothered me when I read it, and it still bothers me all these years later. But his father looked at him and finally saw him for the first time and said, yeah, my son is not that attractive. He does have good hair, though. And I made him cut off his hair. So he finally saw his son for the first time and didn't put his own value or virtue on his kid. And he made it where he, I want to say, allowed his son to blossom into who he was supposed to be. And that was the big moment there when he finally looked at his son. Because not all of us have the best looking kid. Not all of us have the smartest kid. Not all of us have the whatever kid, right? So we can't put that on them. We have to see them for who they are and what their subjective experience is. Let's talk about an accurate, empathic understanding of the human beings that we come into contact with. We want to be able to sense somebody's feelings. Now, when we talk about empathy, we talk about wearing somebody's shoes, that kind of thing. Do we have the ability to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes? And that's important. I think that's a good starting point, but I think it's only a starting point. I think it's better when we have empathic understanding is to try to literally feel what that person feels. Like, what does it feel like to not be able to attain something that you've wanted to your whole life? We can't just go, oh, sorry. I see a lot of people, and it kind of bothers me. Somebody will say, sorry for your loss. I mean, I get it, but I don't think that's overly empathic. I think that's just a start. It's just not enough. Or someone will say, well, sorry, I'm really sorry that happened to you. Or, wow, that's got to be really rough. That's just not enough. That sounds very surface and superficial to me. I think if you really want to understand how somebody feels and to really emotionally connect with them, you have to be able to understand that feeling from the depth of your soul, to understand what loss is, what happiness is, what sorrow is, what joy is, and do it from their point of view. I think we want to pay attention to people, like I mentioned before. When they talk, we really want to, we don't have to stare them down. We don't have to have eye contact all the time. I understand that that's maybe a bit much. But like I mentioned earlier in the show, I think it's a little bit or a lot disrespectful when people are trying to talk and you're sitting on your phone. You've got your head looking at some computer. Or every time your phone rings, you're looking down at it to see who texted you, as if that's more important. As a matter of fact, if you're with somebody and you really care about them, you want an emotional connection, turn it off. Like what, it can't wait? Like what did people do before phones, right? So the thought that you can't do that now doesn't make any sense to me. We also need some skills. You want to be able to listen in a very non-defensive manner and don't deny and don't deflect. We need to listen more than we speak. And when we speak, you want to be able to seek to understand. In other words, ask questions. Try to find out where somebody's coming from. You want to notice their nonverbal cues, and you want to validate people. Now, I want to do another show later on about how to destroy emotional connection, and a lot of it's just going to be just the opposite of this, obviously. But to be a little bit more specific here, when somebody is hurt and they say, I feel this way, it's not helpful to say, that didn't happen, I didn't do that. That's number one. Like denial, no, that doesn't work. And the deflection or the defensiveness could be, well, okay, but do you remember the time you did that? Do you remember the time you did this other thing? So again, you're blowing up the conversation to all these things, and you're not listening to your partner at that time. And you shouldn't be trying to win every argument. Every discussion, you should be trying to learn about your partner. Why do they feel the way they do? Try to understand their feelings. Go for the feeling first. Don't go for the logic and the logistics and the reasoning behind it. That's not going to work when somebody is hurt. Again, it's called emotional connection. You want to understand that. I'll give you an example of having a good conversation. So, for example, I enjoy music. If somebody were to say, what do you like? And I said, I like music. And they're like, oh, I don't. Anyway, and then they go to something else. Obviously, that ends the conversation. A really good conversation would be, what type of music do you like? Who are your favorites? And then I would tell them. And then from there, they could say, well, okay, so your favorite band is The Who. That's interesting. What about that band? What about their lyrics? What about who they are? What about their sounds? What about what they stand for? What resonates to you? Like, what makes you connected to that? I'd really like to know. Like, tell me more about that. And there you would have an interesting conversation, because then the other person, or me in this example, I would answer that, and then I would feel much more encouraged to ask the other person, well, what do you connect to? What do you really like? You know, it's like, in terms of emotional connection, you can get very, very attuned and detailed with somebody. Again, limbic resonance. I mean, think about it. We're only on this earth for a short time, like I mentioned before, as if I have to tell you that, you already know. I mean, you could look at somebody's eyes and go, I wonder how many interesting things that those eyes have seen. You know, maybe they've seen too many bad things. Maybe they've seen a lot of good things. Tell me about that. What is the most exciting thing you've ever seen in your life? Right? Or you could look at somebody's mouth and be like, well, you know, what are the words that you've said to somebody that moved somebody so much? Have you ever moved somebody to tears with the words that you've said? Has somebody else ever said something to you that made such a difference to you? Are your grandparents alive? Did they leave you with some words of wisdom? I'd like to know. Or when you see someone who's in shape, and you see that they have, let's say, great musculature through their arms. One of the things you have to know is that they've experienced a lot of pain in order to get that way, because they have to keep damaging their body over and over again with a more harsh and stimulus over and over again to get that way. That's a good question to ask, right? How long have you worked out? What kind of pain do you have to endure to look like that? How consistent do you have to be on a diet to constantly put amino acids into your bloodstream so you can get bigger every day over a period of time? What is that like? Do you cheat on your diet? And if you cheat on your diet, tell me about the guilt that comes over you, if any, because I'd like to be able to deal with my guilt. There are many, many questions that you can come up with in order to develop limbic resonance or attunement, or again, emotional connection with another human being. And let me leave you with this, because we're almost at 30 minutes. I have to stress this because it's very important. Again, when we're trying to connect with another human being, it's not about us. We need to try to be a blank slate. I'm not saying be a blank slate when they ask you a question, because then you're allowed to say your thoughts, your opinions, and your perceptions. And I say don't hold back. You're 100% responsible for the message you give. You're not responsible for how it's perceived or understood. That's on them. So I would say don't worry about offending people if maybe your point of view might be offensive to them. But I think it's very important when we talk to people to listen to their subjective experience. Here's a quick story. There's a little boy. He walks over to a tree. He sees this bird in the tree. And he notices that this bird has a frown. And he thinks to himself, I want to make this bird smile. So he starts to do things. He starts to try to shake the tree. That doesn't work. Then he sees some rocks, so he takes some rocks and starts to throw the rocks at the bird to see if he can make him smile. Maybe he'll notice, well, I'm here, I'm trying to play, so maybe that'll make him smile. Then he starts to jump up and down, he starts to yell, and he tries to get the bird's attention. All of this falls in vain because the bird still has a frown. So the child decides to do this for like 3 hours straight. Finally, the bird has a change, and now he's smiling, or so the child thinks. And then the kid walks away because he feels he did his job. His subjective experience was that the bird needed to smile, and therefore he did all these things, so he made the bird smile. Unfortunately, he wasn't looking at this bird's subjective experience. Because going to the moral of the story, it wasn't a bird, it was a bat. And the bat was hanging upside down by himself. And he enjoyed that, so he was smiling. But he was upside down, so the kid didn't understand that. So by the time the kid went through all of these things, from his own experience, he thought this bird started to smile, when in fact, he made this bat frown and made him sad. And that's what I would say when we talk to other people. Stay out of other people's stuff. Listen to them for who they are. They're individuals. They're allowed to be individuals. Now, in order to help do this, we need to be able to identify our own triggers. You want to try to identify when you're trying to manipulate other people based on your own feelings and emotions. And you don't want your limbic system to take over the show. In other words, you hear something, you don't like it, you become offended, or you feel like in some way, shape, or form you might be rejected by this person because they disagree with you in some way. Well, instead of just listening to them, your limbic system starts to get charged up. And so your heart rate might go up a little bit, your breathing might go up a little bit, you might get a little bit angry or annoyed because you're trying to defend something here. And so then you try to manipulate that person. You try to protest them in some way. You try to tell them that they're wrong, and you try to explain why you're right, and they obviously don't know what they're talking about. And so once we go down that road, there is no attunement. There is no limbic resonance. There is no emotional connection. So one of the tricks here, if you want to call it that, to emotional connection, is to be strong enough, powerful enough to work on any type of trauma you may have had, or adversities that you had in your life where you're still leaning in one direction and you're not in the middle anymore. That you can accept and accommodate new information from other people without feeling you have to put your finger on somebody else's scale to move them in a different direction. My name is Joe Peroni. This is the Rise Above Project. I hope today was valuable to you in some way. Please subscribe and tell a friend. Thank you.